me introduce our panelists. We have Greg Edel will be the moderator, director at Pack Forest, professor at UW. Greg has a ton of things to do, and then we dumped all the maple stuff on him. He's become our chief cook and bottle washer and everything else here, and runs the Sugar Shack, and just the whole Pack Forest team's just been fantastic to work with and make this happen. So he'll be directing us or leading this. And then can I introduce the panelists here? So we have Brian Reed. Brian's interesting story. We needed some part-time help because last year was just crazy busy for all of us, and we got a little bit of budget to hire some help, and we put an ad out for someone. We were interviewing people, and Jeff Rupert posted it, who will be here in a few minutes. Jeff's running a little late. Jeff posted it on his Facebook, and he was friends with Brian, right? And he asked Brian, hey, are you interested in this? And Brian runs the Clecoot Gold big leaf maple operations on Vancouver Island. But his board and him felt like for him to be able to come to the US, come across the border down here and work with us on all of our different sites would be really good experience for him. And so they agreed to let him go. So he, as I understand it, because he wasn't there, they didn't produce anything this year, right? But Brian's fantastic. He worked his butt off for us. And then when our season ended, he went to New York and worked with Mike Farrell. So he's got tons of experience, true pioneer in the big leaf maple industry in the Pacific Northwest. And any questions about how they do things in Canada, he's your guy. And we have Mike Farrell. I think everybody knows Mike. He wrote the book on maple syrup industry, ran Cornell's Research Institute for 15 years? 15 years or so? 13 years. Everybody in the industry knows him. We're all here, I would say, because of Mike. Because Indro and I got a call from this guy in New York, and he's like, you guys should apply for this grant. And we're like, why would we apply for that? We don't do maple. He's like, well, you could. And here we are. So we have Mike to thank for that. And now on the end, we got the true Washington pioneer. Sure, you've all seen him on TV. We're erecting a statue of him out here. Neil McLeod, really the pioneer of Washington big leaf maple syrup, and the only commercial supplier, I think, in Washington, right? That's right. So really appreciate Neil being here with us. So that's your panelists. Our idea was we will have this recording posted. Yeah, that's what John's doing for us. And they're going to record all these sessions all day tomorrow, and they'll all be individually, for each session, there'll be a recording, and you can watch them later. So, so I'm going to turn time over to Greg. The idea for this tonight was a fireside chat, kind of just to get 3 experts of the industry to talk, and Greg will lead a discussion with them.
Hi, thank you for coming. The thing that is the most exciting is to have everybody here together to think about this. So I think it was the perfect way for us to start in terms of having everyone introduce themselves. I got roped into this by Indro, who wrote the first grant and said, hey, we're going to start making maple syrup. And I thought, oh, have you thought of doing that at Pack Forest? That would be a good, maybe we could do that. And I thought I would put some buckets on trees, collect some sap. Oh, how much work could that be, right? But of course, it quickly becomes a lot, as you all know. All right. So my job as a facilitator is to try to get out of the way of the panelists and let you guys interact. I'm going to just start by asking each of you to share a little bit of your story about how you're engaged with the big leaf maple industry. And then within that storyline that you tell, you might think about, sort of the opportunities of how we can all be pulling together to make more of this. All right. So, Neil, do you feel comfortable starting us off?
Well,
got it from mine.
Oh, well, that's a good idea.
Can everybody hear me?
For the recording, I think we want to have that down here. You're going to get
How close you have to? Okay, I'm not used to this, but I started maple syrup and must have been.
Okay.
Can you hold it up, yeah, because anything that you say into the mic will get put on, so we want to catch it.
Roger that. I started maple syruping probably 10 years ago. I'd always kept bees. All my hives died in the big collapse. I was out of sugar. I'd read where you could tap big leaf maple, but it wasn't worth it. I started, and within a couple of years, I was good at it. I followed the sapsuckers on Vancouver Island, their newsletter, and I compared what I was doing with them, and I knew that I was in the right place at the right time. My son started. He sold some of my syrup to Panelists in Seattle, and suddenly there was such a demand. I decided that I was going to go commercial. So I drove to Wisconsin, bought an evaporator, got it home, and got a hold of Mike, who told me everything I was doing wrong and that I needed to set up with with vacuums. The way I was thinking about doing it wasn't going to work. He was right. And I got started, and I was doing okay. And I constantly talked to Mike, who was a great help. Without him, I would have quit. But every time he told me what to do, it cost me a lot of money. So that was the downside of it. But I'll take this opportunity to thank you for all the help you gave me. Now I've worked out a lot of the problems. I think. Every year I run into new problems that I work out. SAP, it's all the same, but the SAP on the West Coast, I think, is a little bit different than the East Coast. They have one season. You peak and then you're slowly going down, I think. I'm always at the beginning of the season or at the end of the season. And you can see it go by daily. The first day I've got a lighter sap. The next day, if you put all your bottles together in a run, it's slowly getting darker and darker and darker until it quits. Mike, go ahead and you can talk.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in New York, in Albany, eating fake maple syrup like almost all Americans, right? I didn't learn about maple syrup till I went to grad school for forestry, and we went on a school field trip to Hyberg Forest. I went to SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, where they have like a 3,000 tap sugar bush, and Saturday field trip was to there for pancake breakfast and learn about sugaring. And I got hooked, like we all did, right? Everybody who gets into this, we just love it. That's why we're here, right? And so I learned about it then. I immediately went home, and that weekend started tapping trees. I didn't know what I was doing, like all of us when we first start. And I ruined 3 of my mother's pots. She eventually kicked me out of the kitchen. Tried to boil it outside. I ruined all that. Gave up on trying to make syrup, just drank the sap because the sap is incredible, right? And I just drank sap for several years until I was working I went to grad school for forestry, and my first job out of grad school was working as a forester. And I was working for Cornell. It was a joint position with the state DEC as public service forester. And the position became available to, they were looking for a new director at Maple Research Center for Cornell in Lake Placid. And my boss at Cornell at the time said I should apply for it. I said, yeah, it sounds amazing. But it says you need 5 years experience, and I have less than 1. He said, well, apply anyway, see what they say. I applied. They hired me. Luckiest thing that ever happened to me, right? And so then I dedicated the next 13 years of my life to just learning all about maple and running the research center. And I got my PhD at Cornell during that time as well on maple, and just I became really interested in everything about it. How I got into big leaf maple was just researching all the different types of trees, different species of maple you can tap, and different trees as well. So I got a lot into birch and beech and walnut, doing research on the different types of species. And then, there's 120 some odd species of maple in the world. Sugar maple and red maple are pretty much the only two that are used commercially. There's now a little bit of big leaf maple, hopefully a lot more. A little bit of Acer mono in Korea, a tiny bit in Eastern Europe, Acer platanoides, Norway maple, which we tap now here. So, I just think, like it's been relegated to the Northeast for so long, but there's such a huge opportunity throughout the world. And especially here in the Pacific Northwest, where you have such this incredible abundant resource of big leaf maple. We have the technology now to be able to collect the sap, make it into syrup. Like maybe in the past, maybe it wasn't worth it, like the stuff that you read, because you didn't have vacuum tubing. Now with vacuum tubing or 3/16 tubing on the hillside, all the technology you have, you can really get good yields. And you have incredible markets here. You sell out right away, right? The more you make, the more you can sell, which is true for just about everybody. And that's why I think big leaf maple is such an incredible opportunity. I left my position at Cornell 4 or 5 years ago, started a business with a partner to do maple sugaring and other types of tree sugaring on a large scale. And when I originally got, I was thinking like one of the best opportunities is out here in the Pacific Northwest with big leaf maple. And I came out here a couple trips, looking for the right land, looking for the right opportunity. Never really found it. And so we haven't, with our business, started it out here yet. But I do think there's just an amazing opportunity. It's so exciting to see so many people getting involved with it. And, the more research and education we do, and there's just such an incredible opportunity here as we've developed it. And in the East, we can do even better things out here in the Pacific Northwest, I think. So glad we're having the first ever and annual Big Leaf Maple Conference, and lots of great things happen.
Hello, my name is Brian Reed. I'm the production manager of Clecoot Gold, a small commercial company in Canada on Vancouver Island. I've been producing syrup for about 5 years now. Our company is sort of the end product of university studies. The first one being from Deirdre Bruce from the University of Victoria. She did a master's thesis on big leaf in 2008. And one of the parts of her study was in Port Alberni, which is the region I'm from. And that followed up with an undergrad thesis by my former manager, who was working as a garden manager for our tribe. We started Clecoot Gold based off the information from these two studies, and that we had 2,000 trees on one of our Indian reserves. So it was an opportunity to create some jobs and tap a sustainable natural resource. And that's how I got to where I am now.
I think that's coming over you. Are you okay with that? Or should we go around? So I had this thought of a question, and all of you have some kind of an affliction now, right? That you want to make maple syrup. And then with that are all the people in your life, right? And do they want you to make maple syrup too? And this question just sort of came to me listening to the three of you, because there's a scale issue here. All right. So Neil, you have some family to think about, right? And then Brian sort of scales up to the tribe and the societal structure. And Mike has taken on some sort of corporate structure, which I don't think I quite understand yet. But maybe you could talk, each of you, and I'm going to start with Neil again, because we're going to go from smallest organization up. And the idea here, Neil, is to think about what were the challenges in getting started within the context of your life, right? Like you have some land, and you say to your wife, Delight, you say, I'm gonna like start really tapping maple syrup. Like, how does this go? Like, how does one muster all the energy and keep going? You know, because you got to get over this hump. There's that initial phase where it's a little bit tricky, and then you can get it going. Okay? Pass it. I think it's got to go over you, like behind
When the first year I started, I had no idea what I was in for. We'd set up, we were running about around 1,000 taps, and it was on high vacuum. And overnight, I suddenly had like 1,600 gallons of sap with no RO. Now, that first night, I started cooking that day, and I cooked 36 hours straight. And at the end of it, I go, man, when I was a young man fishing, I could work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was in my 60s, and there's no way I was going to keep up with this. I called Mike, and he told me, well, you dumb kid, you have to RO it. So I ordered an RO out of Ross Sugarbush. That's where I generally shop. Okay, reverse osmosis. Okay, which now I'm taking really weak sap, coming out of a vacuum. I'm probably running about 1.4 on the bricks. And now I'm taking it generally, if I have enough sap, and that's the biggest problem I have, is I don't have enough sap. I'll get to that in a minute, but I'm taking it up to about 8 or 9% before I start cooking. At 9%, it's all I can do to keep up during the day. I'm not making 600 gallons an hour. My best day was 27 gallons in one day. Big difference, but I don't have the sap. Roughly, to really cook and make it worthwhile, I need about 4,000 gallons of sap. Because cooking 1,000 gallons, I have the same loss as, say, 10,000 gallons. And by loss, I mean I'm going to lose sap in my evaporator. When I shut down, I always lose a 50-gallon drum of probably 7 to 10% sugar. I'm also losing it in my reverse osmosis. When I shut down, there's always sugar left. And so the biggest problem I think you're going to find is on a small scale, it's real easy. 70 gallons, great. But if you're going commercial, getting enough sap is difficult. Getting back to the main question is, the challenges I think that I had when I started. One of my big challenges, I'm so far away from the supply lines. If anything breaks down, I've got the closest place to get anything is Wisconsin. So I have to have doubles of everything in my sugar house, 2 of everything. This year I had a big breakdown in the middle of, we had that really cold weather, Christmas to January, and I broke a motor went out in my reverse osmosis. I had 4,000 gallons of sap sitting there that I couldn't do anything with. There's no way I was going to just cook it at 1.4%. I just didn't have that kind of time, and it would use up so much energy. So I ended up dumping that. That's a huge challenge, trying to get everything you need for a season right where you want it. There's nobody else out there really doing it on scale. Maybe on Vancouver Island, but that's a long ways away too. And I don't know, Brian probably has the same problems I do. Okay, and so you try and figure out everything that can go wrong, and the answer is always easier than the question, because I don't know the right questions to ask until it actually clobbers me over the head, and then I realize I've got a problem. Now I've got to figure it out. And that's when you want to be able to call someone like Mike. He knows everything. He can help me out. I do have when I first started, I had a copy of his book. Helped me a lot. I could go to it because things are similar, just similar, I'm saying, between the East Coast and the West Coast. I think the West Coast is run on groundwater instead of a snowpack. I think, and I've never been to the East Coast, so I can't tell you for sure, but I think they're driven by snow. As that snow melts off, they're pulling sap. I seem to do really well if we have a big freeze and then it starts raining. I know I'm going to get sap and it's going to come pouring out of those trees. I think the best hour I had last season, I was pulling out of 700 taps. I was getting 120 gallons an hour. And that was after a really good freeze. And I was taking pictures of it pouring into my evaporator, into my extractor. It looked like somebody had turned the faucet on and all three were just gushing in. It was, that, to me, that's exciting. I'm still having a good time with this. I started as a hobby. I moved it up into where I'm commercially producing it, and I'm still having fun. When I get to the point where it becomes a lot of work and I don't want to show up in the morning, I'll quit. Somebody else gets to take it from there. I think I've broken a lot of ground. I help a lot of people that come by my sugar house, and I'm always willing to show them what I'm doing and how I set up. And I think my setup compared to the East Coast, mine's a lot more elaborate just because we have all that warm weather. When I hit 55 degrees, I'm creating a lot of bacteria in all my lines. And so the next big run of sap is going to flush all that bacteria down my lines. And I've got, I've come up with a way where I'm capturing all of that before it ever gets to my extractor to plug up everything, and you can't pump it. And I don't know on the East Coast if you get that kind of, you have that problem?
Oh, we have it. It's just towards the end of the season.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to deal with it all the time here.
I deal with it.
Yeah. And we deal with it. One of the issues, like we had a record year in the East Coast this year. And we had a week of 50s with no freeze in the middle of March. And people who just had buckets and just hung a bucket on a tree had a horrible year because they went a week in the middle of the season with no freeze, which you were all very used to. Okay, so if you're just relying on gravity, just hang a bucket on a tree, you don't get the freeze thaw, you're not going to get the sap. And if you have high vacuum on it and you have 26, 27 inches of vacuum, you're drawing sap 24 hours a day. And that's why we had a record yield in the East Coast this year. Because with high vacuum, if it's warm, you just keep on drawing the sap, especially if it's been cold for a while. Okay, so when we're coming out of the cold in March and you have plenty of groundwater and the trees are thawing, and you can just continue to draw sap over and over. Okay, so if you're coming out of a really warm spell, if it's been warm and it hasn't froze for a long time, that's a challenge. That's why there might be a ton of big leaf maples, say, down by the coast. But do you get the right weather? Part of this whole research, you guys are going to go over it tomorrow, the great research that University of Washington has done over the last few years and looking at sap production by site, climate, elevation, all that stuff. That's the kind of data we need to know, say, where is it the most viable? Okay, because we're still learning a lot, and every year is going to be different. Every year is different. So doing this over time, we'll just continue to learn more and get more knowledgeable and be able to make better decisions and better investments about where we want to do big leaf. Greg, your original question, I think.
Yeah, so let's go with Brian first about the original question, because I'm trying to scale this up.
Okay.
All right, so I want you to go last in thinking about doing that big scale up.
Sure. Yep.
Right? So Brian, thinking about scaling up in more of a community organization, right? So we have some people out here who will be engaged in a community sap collection. right? Or they're working with a number of partners. That's a different thing than being mostly on your own, right? And so maybe you can talk about how that works and any challenges you have.
So being a smaller producer compared to someone like Mike's operation that has 100,000 taps on one site, we operate on a gas-powered vacuum pump that has opportunity to get to potentially 2,000 trees. Right now, I can only grab about 1,300 off that one pump, but the problems become, without the proper slope, it becomes this we have to add sap lifters or different pumps to try to get the sap from downhill areas. This all gets very expensive very quickly. Like if you have the money, you can do almost anything. But starting out, you're going to want to pick the best area with the best slope. You're going to want to use stainless steel instead of plastic. That's something I've learned the hard way. And just it all comes down to like buying the right machines and the right equipment for your scale. For instance, we bought a large 3x8 evaporator for our company starting out, but it was too big. So we'd run into this problem of not having it bottom out and like having to batch each batch of syrup and sort of isolate, upper and lower pans and juggle pre-syrup around and try and finish it all in one go. So it really helps to buy the right equipment and, what is your, one day you might make use of that big machine and then, that might only be for about 10 days out of 3 months. And then the other 40 days, you're only getting like a quarter of that sap flow. So it's always been a big struggle to, there isn't really a middle ground. It's these highs and lows that you almost can't plan for unless you have, 4,000 trees. And that's what I think is the hard part.
That was good. Maybe you pass it to Mike. Neil, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll add something to that. That's absolutely right what Brian was saying, where you're dealing with smaller amounts of sap. But what I believe is on the West Coast, a small producer, the only way you can do it is you add refrigeration. I've got a milk tank that I refrigerated this last year. I keep my sap at 34 degrees. Now, instead of having to cook every other day because you can't let that sap just sit out, it's degrading, I can hold on to my sap for 6 days. So I'm picking up a couple thousand gallons every day. I run 3 different sites and I can refrigerate it. So at the end of 6 days, I have enough sap that I can start cooking on. But honestly, I don't see any other way to do it because you're cooking every 2 days. Refrigeration made all the difference. It bought me more time too. I wouldn't be quite as busy because I knew it was just, I was putting it into a refrigeration. I could hang on to it. If I was getting too much, I'd just concentrate it right back to the tank, getting rid of through my reverse osmosis. And I believe that if you're a small producer, the only way you're really going to be able to do it is with refrigeration. Back to Mike.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes down to resources. You have human resources, which is your time, which is the most valuable, right? And then you can spend monetary resources on equipment like refrigeration, right? So it's where you want to invest to be able to have, I think, the quality of life that you want to have during sugaring season, right? Which I think is back to your original question, like how do you balance this and how do you decide to make sugaring now a new part of your life, which Greg can attest to takes over your life for a certain time, right? But you didn't expect it to. And so you have to go into it with realistic expectations of how much time do you have to spend on sugaring between November and March? How much money are you willing to invest in the technology that's going to make it as easy as possible on you? And who's going to help you? And who wants to help you? And who do you need to potentially hire, depending on what your scale is, right? And so I can just tell you from my perspective, I went from running the research center at Cornell where we had 6,000 taps to now we have 160,000 taps. And I went from being one of the guys out there tapping to I don't tap a tree unless it's me showing somebody how to tap a tree. I'm just managing people, right? Which is a lot harder than tapping trees. And so, and then, and just getting to the scale, and we're at 160,000 taps right now, but when we're fully built out, we'd be about 350,000. So we're not even halfway there yet with the land that we own. And we've slowed down over the last couple of years. We were at 140,000 3 years ago. We've only put up 20,000 taps in the last few years because we went out too fast. We got too much going on. I had way too many people who didn't know what they were doing. It was way too much management problems. And we slowed down and said, let's just take care of what we have. Let's get a good team in place and make the most of.
Can you tell us some of the things that went wrong that we can watch for?
Well, it's already 8:02. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mostly, especially on the East Coast where maple syrup is a commodity and it's not worth anything. Big leaf maple syrup is worth a lot of money. Every ounce of maple syrup you make matters because it's worth a lot of money. And in the East Coast, it's just a commodity. And prices were actually really low until last year when it was a bad year. And the only reason you get high prices is because you had low production. And if you have low production, even prices go up. That doesn't help you because you had such low production. Okay, so on the East Coast, making maple syrup, it's just, there's two different businesses. There's making maple syrup and there's selling maple syrup. Everybody on the West Coast, you're doing both. Okay, and you're only making money by selling maple syrup. I can guarantee you everybody here could buy maple syrup at Costco way cheaper than you can make it yourself. Okay? So you have to sell it at a very high price, and you're making it in order to sell it, but that's where the margins is in selling it. On the East Coast, you have to be extremely efficient and have high production per tap and low cost per tap in order to make some type of revenue to pay back your really high fixed costs. And we have a session tomorrow. We're talking about the economics of sugaring. That's what I focused on. My background is in economics, and that's what I did a lot of my research on and stuff at Cornell, was economics of maple syrup. And there's a lot of economies of scale at sugaring, and you don't have that in the Pacific Northwest right now. Nobody here is at any scale where you have economies of scale at sugaring. Okay, so you have to accept that fact and work around it and do the best you can with what you have to make your cost as low as possible, to make it as enjoyable as possible. Like Neil said, when it's not fun anymore, he doesn't want to show back up, right? So you do it not because there's a lot of money in it either. Yes, you can, the price of maple syrup is what, $2-3 an ounce, right? More, right? So whereas at Costco, it's 34 cents an ounce. I can go buy syrup at Costco for 34 cents an ounce. Okay. So you want to do it so it's enjoyable and hopefully profitable. If not profitable, at least not that costly. Okay. Because we're doing it because we enjoy it. And if you don't count your labor, you can actually make money at it. Okay. On a cash basis. So, you know, for my perspective, just like going from Cornell to running the business, I had to give up my job. Like, I originally started this business just as a consulting thing. I do a lot of consulting when I was at Cornell. I took on a client who wanted me to help him get started in the maple industry and advise him on investing in sugaring. And I did, and we hit it off, and we had a great relationship, and I got some investments going for him. And I had a hard time finding the right people to run it. And I had to do a lot more than I originally expected. And then I had to make the decision, because I was trying to keep running my job at Cornell, start this business with Dwight. I had a young family, got 3 kids now, 4, 6, and 8. And so, like, it was just crazy, and I couldn't do it all. So I gave up the job at Cornell to focus on this. And I still spent way more time doing this business than I ever did at Cornell. It was a lot harder and learned a lot over the years. And I think making sure that you balance the business aspect, which, you know, we would all love to do it and make money at it. Okay, because we like doing it. It's even more fun if you're not losing money, you're making money. And if that's your livelihood, then it's extremely important because it's your livelihood and you got a family to support. Right. So just thinking about how you balance all that and structuring your business in a way that's going to be good for you personally and good for the business is really thoughtful on how you do it. It's going to be different for everybody.
Keep playing this microphone game. Okay, thank you for that. Another thing that's been on my mind is what do we need to do to get over this sort of hump that we have being separated? Well, the knowledge we're building, but we're separated from the knowledge and the experience of the East Coast. We're separated from the equipment, right? We have a lot of things that we have to do to sort of grow. And I'm wondering if we can think through like what some of our challenges are, we've already talked about, but then brainstorm some ways that we think we might be able to get past those challenges. If anybody wants to start with that.
So my company is planning to expand to 3,000 to 4,000 trees, more if we can find them. And some of the things we're going to try and do include refrigeration. We've got a 3,000 gallon refrigerated tank and a 1,000 gallon refrigerated tank to keep the sap longer while we try to process it. Another thing we're going to try to do is add ultraviolet sterilization on the intake and outtake from the RO machine to help try and sterilize the sap with the warmer temperatures we deal with. Because straight from the tree, the yeast and bacteria can start right in the tubing on those warmer days. Like one year we had 5 main lines coming out of our releaser, and we had 2 of them had sap lifters to get over some of these reverse slope areas in the swamp. So we had 1,300 taps, and on one of the lines, the sap lifters would freeze. So I would get fresh sap coming in from the other lines that didn't have these lifters. And then suddenly, when it finally thawed, you'd get all this sap from like a day ago that was old mixing in with the new sap. So you'd get like a mixture of quality out of the same swamp, basically, of trees. We bought a new sap lifter that's powered by solar panels with its own built-in pump. So I haven't used that one yet, but this is just an idea because it has its own built-in heater to prevent freezing. So maybe solar paneled lifters and other things, newer technologies will benefit us on the West Coast that just weren't around, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So there's new machines coming out all the time that could potentially help us with our struggle.
Brian, could you explain what a lifter is? Because I don't think many people out here have one.
So maybe Mike, you could.
Yeah, it uses vacuum to draw sap up tubing lines. And so where you have trees that are below the grade of your vacuum pump or releaser where the sap comes into, I believe it's about every inch of mercury on your vacuum. And so you can get up to about 28 inches of vacuum. And so you can draw sap up. If you have 28 inches of vacuum, you can draw sap up, I believe, about 22 feet in height. It'll lift the sap up. The vacuum will draw the sap right up the tubing. So Brian's got a whole bunch of great trees below where his collection tank is. So we put in the tubing system these lifters, which is basically a network of tubing, use the 5/16 tubing to then have it just suck right up to a higher line to go right in. And you do those if you have high vacuum and you have great trees that you would otherwise not be able to get to. And they have problems, which Brian explained. So it's not ideal, but if you didn't put that lifter in, you get zero sap from those trees. So it's better than nothing. Yes?
Is the reason you can't draw the sap up the hill to your vacuum pump, your high vacuum pump, because of resistance in the lines over distance? So the lifter breaks that?
No, it's because it's below. It's like if we're right here and we want to get the maple trees that are 20 feet in elevation below us, then we need a lifter to suck it up. There can be some resistance in some lines if you have way too many taps on a line. That'd be a great problem to have. That you overflow the lines and you just can't get enough sap in there. That we would all love that problem, but that's not what usually is the issue.
So maybe we should just address questions at some level. I don't.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to say, though, to your question about what are the ways we can address the challenges in the Pacific Northwest, I think one of the biggest challenges is scale. And I think the great ACER project that you have now is the community-based sugaring program of getting people to collect sap in many different places. Eliza can speak to it for your program in Oregon. You're going to talk about that tomorrow. But you have limited equipment, right? It's hard to get equipment. It's expensive to ship it from the east. And it's really expensive when you're only talking about 100 taps or 200 taps, okay? You can buy syrup way cheaper than you can make it if you're trying to do it at that scale. And if people set up sugaring operations with a really good RO, reverse osmosis, to remove most of the water before you boil it, and then an efficient evaporator, you can take in sap from lots of people within, I say, probably 10 to 15 miles is a good range of what people who just want to collect sap. I just want to collect sap. I just like being in the woods. I don't want to be in the sugar house, right? And there's a lot of people who just want to be in the woods. And some people who just love being in the sugar house. They love running the evaporator. Let them do that. Let all the other people that want to just go out and collect sap do that, and you bring it to one spot. Then you have a much more scalable operation, and it's a community building operation, and it can make sense. It make economic sense. And so one of the sessions tomorrow is going to be all about the economics of buying and selling sap and how that works. And so we'll go into quite a bit of detail about that tomorrow, but it's really exciting that you have that ACER grant as the next step in this. Like, the project was like, well, here's the problems we're having right now. one of the ways to go about that is by doing this community type of approach. And so we'll definitely talk more about that tomorrow, and with both Washington and Oregon, what you're doing in that regard is going to be really important in the years to come.
So if you have any questions, if we could repeat the questions before we answer them.
So Neil, did you have anything you wanted to add to that first before we put the question?
Not really. You know, we use sap lifts too. And what we do, we have a lot of places where we're really level. So you'll end up with sap sitting in your lines. So we, every so far, we just drop it down to 0, shoot it up 10 feet, and I pick up the drop I need. So I'm never leaving sap in my lines, which will go bad. And next time you turn everything on, you got a lot of dirty sap. That's what we use them for. We're not trying to lift from down in a swamp or something. And the swampy ground's probably really good tapping, I would think. Yeah. But that's what we use. I really like the sap lifts. I thought they worked great.
Yes, please.
Yes, my question is, have they identified on that bacteria where the sap just kind of turns into stringy, slimy stuff overnight? Is that yeast, or is that some other microbe?
Yeah, so the question is, when your sap turns into a stringy, nasty, slimy, disgusting stuff, that's bacteria. And it creates these poly chains of some sort that hold together, and it creates what's called ropey syrup. And ropey syrup is worth almost nothing. And so if you get ropey sap, you should not boil it. Yeah, you can't filter it, blows out filter papers, and it's just horrible. Yeah.
What I discovered is, at one time I had sap that had been heated in the preheater, and then go out the next morning, and it turned overnight.
Yeah. Yeah, so
I changed my practice. I pulled that stuff off and then put it into cold storage overnight. And it prevented that from happening.
yeah, what you have to make sure is that all the sap that you boil, so the question, to repeat it, is that you had left some stuff in the evaporator, it got warm, and it turns ropey and nasty. You have to make sure all of the sap that you boil, that you put in the evaporator, boils hard and pasteurizes. And the stuff in the float boxes, like a lot of people have float boxes in between, the sap in there is not boiling. It's moving around, but it's not under the heat. You have to get that out, make sure that boils, constantly be taking that out. You have to be extremely vigilant, especially out here, to make sure that everything is getting pasteurized. And then if you can, and I think, Neil, you do this, you break down your evaporator every night, clean it out, take it all out. And I imagine you're then saving that to then put that in your evaporator the first time the next batch, okay? And that also helps you clean out the niter on the pan, makes it more efficient, make sure you don't boil. Burn the syrup. So cleanliness, sanitation is extremely important out here. We can get away with it on the East Coast much more so than you can out here.
My question is two questions. I'm not 100% sure I understand the term economies of scale, so can you explain that a little bit more? And then the other question is, why is big leaf maple supposedly more expensive and somehow worth more than the stuff that comes from back east? Can you make a reference to that?
Okay, I'll talk about economies of scale, and I'll let Neil talk about how much more valuable big leaf maple is than the stuff we can sell. In terms of economies of scale, it's just an economic term. The more that you can produce of something, the lower cost per unit. And we're going to be talking, because there's fixed costs and variable costs. in maple sugaring, you have really high fixed costs to buy the land, build the sugar house, buy the evaporator, put up the tubing, all this stuff. You have a evaporator, the filter press, the vacuum pump. There's just so much money you have to put in just to get started. The more taps you can spread that out over, the better off you are. Because on a variable basis, you can make money, but you never pay back the fixed costs. We're going to go over that in a lot more detail tomorrow. And Neil, you can explain why your syrup costs a lot more.
Okay, my syrup is far more expensive because you can't go into Costco and buy it. Mike's syrup is sold everywhere, probably in the US. To buy big leaf maple and to buy it commercially from someone that's licensed, I'm the only guy on the West Coast or in the US that you can buy it from. So that runs the price up. No one else is doing it. It's a hard to get syrup. On small scale, there's a lot of hobbyists out there, and there will be other commercial operations. The farmer across the river from me had a dairy farm. I don't know how many acres, probably 400 acres. Dairy, and is all going out. They're headed east. He's started tapping his trees. Next year he will be. I was processing for him. He'd haul me his sap, and I would process it, and I think I was giving him a 60. I'd keep 60%. He'd get 40% back in syrup. Next year he'll have his own operation. He's started planting big leaf maples, as I believe that big leaf maple production will start by small operations on wild trees, but the really large scaling up is going to be done with plantations of big leaf maple planted, say like Christmas trees. If I was going to plant trees, and at one time I was going to, now I've been offered a lot of land in the wild, so I'll probably work on that. But if I was planting big leaf maple, I would have a tree every 2 feet, which is really tight. I'd be packing them into that land. And at 8 years old, I'd go out there, and every other tree I would tap, and with the idea that I was going to kill it. Now I'd have a 4-foot spacing. Once I've killed those, then I'd kill every other tree, and I'd just suck the sap out of them probably for 2 years. And I've played with this on trees where I'm cutting branches off of trees that are probably the size of my finger. I get 1 drop every 2 seconds. If I put a vacuum on it, I can't really tell just how much I'm getting, but I can see the sap coming out being pulled by my vacuum. Now, if I have 100,000 trees out there and I'm getting 1 drop every second out of them, 100,000 drops is a gallon of sap. So I don't think anybody else has ever done this experiment, but at the end of the day, I'm getting a tremendous amount of sap out of those trees. Someday maybe I'll really try it on a lot of trees, but so far I experiment on all sorts of things, anywhere from a tree as big as my finger to 4 to 5 inch trees, but with the idea I'm going to kill them. So, but I can collect sap. But if I don't succeed at what I'm doing, when I started this, I was tapping anything, because if I don't pull it off, I didn't think anybody else was going to step into my shoes to try doing this. And if you were to ask me, I think that I've gotten far enough along with this project that it can be done commercially. And whoever makes it big, it probably won't be me. I don't know how much longer I really want to work full time at this. Had a lot of fun, but I'll probably scale back, maybe let Devin take over for me. I've got other interests in life. So I think that probably answers your question, why this syrup is so valuable, because you got to buy it from me, no one else, okay?
Great. So I'm curious, the season is 4 months long. What are you doing the rest of the year? Selling, I imagine, is part of the year, but are you doing other things to help your company, your property be profitable so that you can lose money with maple syrup?
Actually, I'm not losing money with maple syrup. Actually, I'm making money with it. And what do I do with my time now that I'm free? I told you I have a 2-year-old German Shepherd dog that I am training, and she's going to be a fabulous dog. She's just gorgeous. She can open the door to go outside. She can open the door to come back in. If I'm in the same room with her, I can give her the command and she'll close the door. So this is a smart dog, and so that's what I do. Okay, I spend a lot of time with her. I live on 800 acres, and so I'm always clearing trails, cutting firewood. I stay busy. There's no shortage of things to do. So there you go. And I don't sell the syrup. My wife sells it, or Devin. Once it's made and in the bottle, I'm done.
But you do raise bison, you have rabbits, you have chickens, right?
Yeah, and usually, bison, I've had bison for a long time. I'm getting rid of everybody. Actually, I culled my lead bull, he was half woods bison, immense in size. The woods bisons are, plains bison are a lot smaller. I culled them because I'm getting older and they're getting tougher. And believe me, bison are tough animals. Usually when I do a talk, my first question, I'll have a bottle of syrup, and whoever can answer the question about the bison, they can have the bottle of syrup. But can anybody here tell me, why did they, in the big kill-off, and we took all those hides, what did we do with those hides? Why did they want bison hides so badly that we wiped out the bison herds?
Sustenance for other people.
For what?
Those herds were sustenance for other people.
No, what they wanted those hides for was to run the Industrial Revolution. There's stretch in a bison hide. And so it made belts to run all the pulleys, and everything was run off belts, if you recall. And bison hide stretches where cowhide doesn't. And so that's what we wiped our herds out for. Just a little history lesson there, and that was free.
Just from a maple sugaring year-round perspective, it's important to realize that the vast majority of maple operations are just seasonal. So you don't have to do anything with the maple the rest of the year. That's one of the great things about it, compared to like dairy, which every day, you can leave the trees alone for the summer. They'll be just fine. You don't have to do anything. You do have to, in the fall, go through, clean up all your lines, make sure everything is set, all the stuff, all the branches that fell, trees that fell, all the problems, you have to go fix that, get ready for tapping. And then once you're done cleaning up, you can let things sit if you want. And if you want, you can also spend the summer and the fall also installing new tubing. That's what we do, a lot of tubing installation in the summer and the fall. And the summer is also when, especially on a small scale, is when you go out. That's when all the farmers markets and fairs and festivals are. You go out and you sell your syrup then as well. So and also that's the slowest time for maple syrup sales in the grocery store. Syrup sales go way down in the grocery store in the summer, partly because that's when a lot of people are out selling it at farmers markets, so people buy it there. And also because just people don't have pancake breakfast as much in the summer as you do on a cold winter morning. Okay, so syrup sales go way up starting November. But as small scale producers, you can go out and sell at all the farmer markets and fairs and festivals in the summer.
Yeah, one last question. Actually,
How long do you keep your tubing up?
So the question is, how long do you keep your tubing up? Most people keep it up year round. For how many years? Well, that's it. There's probably going to be a difference between the Pacific Northwest and the East Coast in that regard, especially if you're using 3/16 tubing. Because 3/16 tubing, the first year you put that out, it's great, and you're just amazed. how much sap you get, and it's just awesome. And then the second year, it's not so great. And the third year, it's even worse, and so on. Because bacteria builds up in the 3/16 tubing, very difficult to clean. You can take it down and try to clean it. If you try to clean it in place, you're never going to succeed. The only way you're going to clean it is by getting it down, probably doing a very long soak in a chlorine bath to completely clean it, and then do really good flushes to get all the chlorine out, make sure there's no chlorine left. And because of the warm temperatures you have out here, it's much more moderate, mild climate. You have a lot more problems with that. So in the East Coast, we'll leave our main lines out, the main like 1 inch or 3/4 pipe. I don't plan on replacing that for 20, 30 years. Okay. The lateral lines will probably replace every 8 to 10 years. The 5/16. And we decided to go with 5/16 because we have high vacuum. So we're getting our vacuum from the pumps, not from the trees, not from the slope. If we had 3/16, we'd probably be replacing it every 3 to 4 years.
Hey, Greg, I think Brian changes his line a lot quicker than that. He's, comment on that, Brian?
So yeah, in the last couple of years, I've changed my tubes every year. Mike has 150,000 trees. I only have 500 currently hooked up. So if I see scuzz through lots of tubes and I have the crew and equipment to do it, I'm just going to change them all, because otherwise we get storms and windfall, all kinds of stuff. We have to go to put the vacuum up and go check everything. We do clean the tubes with bleach water as well. Do I want to pay to bleach the tubing, to do all this stuff, or it'll guarantee that everything's clean, everything's tight with good slope, no windfall, because it's all been changed. So it's sort of a fixed cost versus just added it to our company right now. Another thing is we've used check valves in the past, and not check valves as taps. So with a gas-powered pump that isn't always refueled, the vacuum will die and sap will go back into the tree. So this can cause sort of a scuzzing of the tube from the tap line through your lateral line. And often we've put too many taps on a lateral line so that the vacuum is a little bit weaker. Like we just figure we have slope, why not add, 15 taps on a line? But you lose your vacuum. It's not going to be the same at the farthest tap as it is at the closer taps. So those will be the ones where the vacuum's not strong enough, but the sap's going back into the tree, it'll create more scuzz. So it's sort of a learning experience, and I might not do that in the future. If I can clean my tubes more efficiently, I won't change them every year. But so far, that's the last couple of years, that's what we've done.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can attest to the fact that Brian has a low tolerance for scuzz, right? Like when he got here, like that line is just scuzzy. We got to get rid of it. Like, all right. Yes. Yep. Okay, so Kent, we're at time. Do you want to?
I think we better.
Yeah, we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, because some people have got to drive. Well, thank you very much, and especially thanks to our panel and Greg. I think it's just so cool that we could get 4 such experienced pioneers of the industry to be here and share with us. So let's give them all a hand, please. Fiona asked a good question, and we will talk more about this tomorrow, but why is Big Leaf so much more expensive? Part of it is just in the amount of work, because our bricks content is half of what it is back east. You got to handle twice as much sap. So there's a lot more work that goes into it. That's why it's more expensive. But the very first time I met with Neil and Devin, they explained to me their their vision, and they'll talk more about it tomorrow, I think, of how we should develop an industry here in the Pacific Northwest, more around like wine industry, where each valley has its own special syrup and it maintains its unique characteristics rather than we all dump it in to one big blender and blends all that unique characteristics away. And tomorrow when we do the taste test and on Saturday, one of our objectives is we've got 8 different syrups. One of them's an imitation syrup, one's an East Coast syrup, and then there's 6 syrups from around Washington and Oregon. And what we think we'll find, not to bias our research here, well, what we think we'll find is that we're not looking to rank the syrups. What we're looking for is characteristics of the syrups. And what we think we'll find is you'll like most of these syrups. We've been trying them and we like them. They're all good, but they're all a little bit different. Not the imitation, yeah. Yeah, when you taste the imitation one, like put terrible and horrible in it.
It might be your favorite one.
So it's a blind test, so you won't know which one's imitation. So, yeah.
My kid eats imitation maple syrup. I'm not gonna give him $500 gallon.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, I think that's a cool idea. I look forward to talking about that more tomorrow. So